My PhD dissertation was about the role of the medical profession, and more specifically the organized medical profession in health insurance policy, and it was a comparison between two rather closed systems, the French one and the German one, and this was my first comparative work, and since then I'm still working on comparison, mainly in Europe. The main research question was to understand the relationship between the state and the medical profession, and the main answer I gave to that was to understand the historical structuration of the medical profession, how institutions were created in order to organize the profession, and also to understand what is the collective identity of the profession, which is defended by different organizations. And it was, I think at least, it was a good way to understand main difference between the French and the German system, even if the health insurance systems are rather close and there's a strong German inspiration on the French system, but the organization and the collective identity of the medical profession are rather different, and this helps to explain a difference in health insurance policy, and especially because in my dissertation there's a historical part, and then I was more focused on the current policies at that time, which were a lot focused on cost containment, and the role of the medical profession and the way it was institutionalized was I think a main explanatory factor of the choice of policy instruments in the health insurance sector in order to tackle the issue of cost containment.
And what
the real start was events that happened in France, because at that time it was at the end of the 1980s. In fact, there were a lot of conflicts between doctors and the state concerning this issue of cost containment, and even before my thesis, I already made some research as a master's student on the health sector, and I was interested in that conflict, and I looked a little bit on the literature, and I saw that there was, at least in France, very little work on the organization of the medical profession. And then I had the idea to compare it to the German case, and in Germany there was a lot of literature inspired by the corporatist literature, and I was a bit struck by that, so I read a lot about the German system and this kind of literature, and then I used the analytical tools developed in Germany, but also in Austria, to understand the French system. It was my PhD supervisor. I already made my first research under his direction in my master, and then he told me that he thought it would be interesting to still work on the health sector, but he was not a public policy specialist. His name, I didn't mention his name. He's Pierre Birnbaum, and he's a specialist of the sociology of the state, of the administration, but he was also interested in corporatism, and for the French political science at that time, he was one of the most internationalized scholars. And so I didn't start with a public policy perspective, but progressively I integrated that perspective. And it was also at that time, at the end of the 80s and the early 90s, that the first textbooks in French were published on public policy. So it was rather an emerging field, and so I stepped in, and I was interested in that literature. I would say that there is more a transformation than an erosion of the social security system. Or if you take social security as a specific type of welfare state, that the differences between the types of welfare system are rather blurring. So after that I was interested in the question of policy convergence on the health sector, but more generally on the welfare system. But what I tried to do, especially in two research, one at the end of the 90s on the development of market tools in healthcare, and then more recently on the development of what we called evidence-based agencies, also in the health sector, agencies which developed assessment tools and based on evidence, and I was interested in comparing several countries, and in this research, this was different with my PhD. I worked more on different systems than in order to raise to tackle the question of convergence. And yes, I observed and with other colleagues convergent process, but with still differences remaining. So I like the expression used by Lévi-Faure and George Jordan. They talk of divergent convergent. That means that systems are converging, but in different ways and with different actors. And by doing that, I used the notion of translation, the specific role of actors in translating models that are diffused at the European level, but also more generally at the international level, but how they are adapted to a national context. So that it leads to more convergence, but without completely blurring the main difference between systems. But in your question, there was another interesting aspect is that when you are a public policy scholar, should you always work on the same policy field or move to other policy fields? So it's a rather difficult question because I'm still focused on health policy, but I'm trying to work more generally also on the welfare state. I worked a little bit on family policies, also pension policies, but it's still the same area of interest. And I think it's very difficult to change policy field because the specialization process, and you better understand the policy field, and all policy fields are rather complex, and it's difficult. But what I'm trying to do is to more recently to have comparative research, comparing different policy sectors, but I'm not doing directly the field work and the empirical work on other sectors, but working with colleagues working on other policy sectors. Yes, I think it's an important role, but there are specific barriers in France because, and this is related to a recent book, maybe I can mention it now, a book we recently co-edited with Philippe Zitoun and Charlotte Alpern on policy analysis in France. And what we stress is that policy expertise in France is monopolized by senior civil servants. And these senior civil servants are not trained in the university. In universities, they are trained in the so-called grandes écoles, so with a specific training track and specific education, and with a rather loose relation to academic research. And these senior civil servants, they think that they have the real expertise on the system because they are high-level civil servants and they are acting in the system, and I made a lot of interviews with the senior civil servants, and what they read is not that much academic literature. They read expert literature, and they are not used to ask academics to be an advisor. So that means that if you want to be an advisor and an expert in contact with, in direct relation with a policy actor, you need to advertise yourself. You need to write articles in journals. So that takes a lot of time. I have some colleagues, especially colleagues with whom I did several research. Bruno Pallier is well known on the comparison of welfare state, and Bruno he's more motivated by that dimension, but that means that he writes a newspaper, he does policy assessment, evaluation, but I prefer to do more research, and I have also a lot of teaching to do, and so that's a choice, because you are not directly contacted by policy actor, but that doesn't mean that sometimes I'm asked to write some article in journals which are diffused to policy actors, or sometimes I was 2 or 3 times member of a commission analyzing or with a reflection on the future of the welfare system, but it's not a systematic. It's not a systematic. And what we stress in the book is that, that the strong influence of the organization of the higher education system on policy and analysis, with this strong separation between the grandes écoles and the university where the research takes place, and the CNRS, which is the National Center for Research in France, and with a strong concentration of policy analysis inside the state, with the key role of senior civil servants, and that also helps to understand that the policy expertise in France is not so open also to international circulation, but even if this has changed in the more recent period. But for us, it was very, very interesting to make a book in that series, because the question of policy analysis is usually not directly raised in policy studies in France, and the framework, because there was a common framework of these books, of the series, so to have chapters on policy analysis in the French Parliament, policy analysis in the interest group, and it also shows the concentration of expertise resource in the state, in the administration, and the weakness of the Parliament, the weakness of the interest groups concerning policy expertise. Three or 4 years ago, there was even a book published with the title Policy Studies à la Française, and stressing a French touch in policy studies. And it expressed by also the fact that the use of the expression of action publique, and more than politique publique, and this can be related to the strong sociological tradition, and the fact that policy studies in France are deeply rooted in sociological approaches. Yes, it says something. In fact, it's not. Just to stress, it's not really a different concept. It's just to stress a different kind of approach, and especially what I just said before, that the importance of the sociological approaches. And this textbook was published in a sociological series, and in France, the development of policy studies is can be strongly related to the influence of the sociology of organization, and this has also something to do with the development of political science in France, because political science was historically developed in the faculty of law. So political science had to emancipate itself from law, and the use of sociological concept was the way to be emancipated from law. And I think it also refers to the influence of my PhD supervisor, who was deeply rooted in sociological approaches and theories. But when I published this textbook in 2008, it was of course not the first one in French, but I wanted to make a longer textbook than the previous one, who were rather short books, and books stressing mainly the theoretical aspects and only presenting the different approaches. And I wanted to put more empirical examples, and especially to have chapters on the different policy actors. And this is also why I use more the notion of action publique, which refers more directly to the different policy actors who are involved in the policy process. Yeah, because this concept, but it's more the concept of programmatic actor than the programmatic elite. Even if we also talk about programmatic elite, but for me the programmatic elite, we stressed in the French case, is an example of programmatic actor, which with other colleagues like William Geniez, I developed as an analytical concept. It started not with a PhD, because on the PhD I was more focused on interest groups, and after working on actors outside state, I wanted to have more insight into the state, and working on the senior civil servants, I was intrigued by the fact that since the 1980s in France, that senior civil servants have some of them have specialized themselves in the social security sector, which was not the case before, because before the senior civil servant considered that social security is an interesting sector, and they started their career in the social security, and then they tried to switch to other policy fields. But in the 80s, there were more and more senior civil servants who made all their career in the social security system for two main reasons. The first one was the importance of the budgetary issues in relation with social security, and the reform of the social security had become very relevant and very important policy issue. And the second reason is that social security is one of the less Europeanized policy sector, so that it was still a sector where the state can act, and for these actors the main issue was to take the power in the system against interest groups like the medical profession, but also against the social partners who are managing the social security system and the different social insurance funds. And with this research, we developed the notion of programmatic actor. That it means that actors who are collectively structured by a policy change system, by a policy reform system. And the other idea was that these actors try to gain power in the system especially by creating new institutions, by changing institution, and then to create new position in that institution, and that these actors then hold. So it's and in the French case, it was an administrative elite, and then we made comparison with other countries, and then also with other policy sector. And these programmatic actors, they can be more diverse. For instance, in Germany, so there are more coalition or more expert teams in the English case. So it's a more general concept. Yeah, well, one of the research question is who has the power in the policy sector, and is it administrative actor, is it political actors, or is it actors outside the state? And so this was a way to give some clues to that question. But what I also want to stress is the methodological aspect, because one of the main reasons explaining that we arrived to that concept is that it was a research with William Chenies. We had the same PhD supervisor, and he works more on the sociology of elites. I'm working more on public policy, and we combine our perspective and also our methodologies. And so we worked on the social background, on the careers, on the position, and in combining that, we will arrive to that concept. And of course, when you work on elite, you also raise the question of democracy. Are there close groups who have the power inside the state, or how far are political actors playing a role? And in this perspective, the comparison with Germany was very interesting, because in Germany, parliamentary actors are key actors, and they are specialized in different policy sectors, especially in the health insurance sector, and so and there is more political bargaining in Germany than in France, where the government endorsed the policy program defined by senior civil servants. Yes, so it's in a way it's a grande école, because you entered the school through a competitive national exam. But what is rather new for this Institut d'études politiques, Institute for Political Science, but the name Sciences Po, or Institute of Political Studies, is a little bit confusing, because these institutions are multidisciplinary, with political science, but not with only political science, and that's a difference with the university, which are more specialized around the traditional academic discipline, and this is why these institutions are interesting, because you have to study political science, but also economics, law, history. So it's a very interesting combination. But there are two specificities of this institute. The first one is that it's a small institution, because every year there are only 100 students who are admitted in the institute. So you are very close to the students. So so you can have new ways of teaching. And the other specificity is that it is highly included in the current trend of higher education policies in France, trying to bridge the gap between the grandes écoles and the universities. And this Institut d'études politiques was created by the cooperation of two universities, and it's completely integrated to the two universities, and this helps also to connect the institute to research and to research center, and especially in public policy. Yeah, I think I would advise to do comparative work, and if I say that, it's not only because I did it, and for me it was really fruitful, because when you do empirical comparison, it's not only that you compare cases, but you also compare the way to analyze cases, because for instance, for my own PhD, in order to understand the German system, I had to read the German literature, with different concepts and with different intellectual tradition. And I think this is also very interesting when you do comparative work, because you also compare the notions, the analytical tools, and even if there is a strong internationalization of policy studies, some of the notions circulate widely, but they are not used in the same way, and they are adapted to national tradition. But if I stress that, it's also in a way a reaction to a tendency in the French studies of public policy, and I observe that there are more and more very monographic studies on very local and very narrow cases, and I think that's problematic, and so and there's also a risk for a part of the French studies to be apart from the international evolution, and also because I think that issues like European integration, internationalization are very important issues. So I would say do comparative work and compare national tradition of policy studies.